Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doom Patrol. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I love that, Vic brings Ronnie over to Doom Manor. It's kind of like, and she's like, wait, you seriously live with a mummy? She's like, I thought you were joking when you said that. He was like, no. He's like, actually, I downplayed kind of like the crazy shit that goes down here. And so he's like, oh, hey, talking to Larry, and Larry's just like mad depressing. He's just staring up. He's just like, he's just so like melancholy and stuff. It's like, oh, this is Ronnie. He's like, yeah, nice to meet you. And just staring off. It's like, where's Niles? Space. Like, outer space? Yup. And just like, he's just so like, it's like, I mean, I guess after everything last episode about the whole like, well, because more so than anything, he's still thinking about the whole complicated thing with his family, because he ends up talking about it later on. Because the fact of the matter is, his grandson's in the hospital, but his family hates him and everything. So there's that. Vic and Ronnie are eating food that's cooked by Miranda. Larry's sitting there and just like, making stuff for Dorothy. You know when she'll get back? Space. Niles is on top of that. Which even there's a whole thing with Rita. She learns, apparently the girl who got the part of her in the play, it's like, oh, like, she got hit. It was an accident. I was like, what? And then, like, she's like, do you want the role? And, like, of course, Rita's like, of course I'm going to take it. But then her mom shows up and it's like, oh, you think she gave it to you? No, it's like, because basically saying, like, I went down on her to give her the role. Because at first I was like, oh, did you take control? Like, I was like, did Rita's mind kind of get warped and her subconscious manifests itself as her mom, and she ended up killing the lady to take a role? I was like, was that it? But it's like, no, it was a dream. And obviously Rita's kind of studying for like a beekeeper's role for the play and everything, and she talks to the lady. And I like that lady a lot, because that lady talks mad shit about her daughter, being like, oh, she's dumb as shit and stuff like that. I'm like, Jesus, lady. But obviously Rita kind of, projecting, being like, don't talk about her like that. Like, you're shutting down her potential and stuff like that, because it's like, basically you shouldn't, basically to get her places in the world, like in particular, you're trying to bribe her teacher to give her better grades. You shouldn't do that because you'll stunt her potential and stuff like that. And I think it was a very cathartic situation for Rita, because the lady, her and Rita drunk beers, and they, Rita kind of opened up about everything. So basically, the lady kind of says like, oh, you got like imposter syndrome, because basically in her mind, she feels like almost like nothing she does, she is worthy or good enough, because she's like, I didn't earn it. Because like there's some part of her feels like none of the success or anything that she's ever gotten is hers, which is so interesting too, because even like earlier in the episode, like Miranda was praising like, oh my God, Rita. She's like, oh no, I know you're thinking like to yourself, come just because I'm a celebrity. I mean, celebrities are just like you. I mean, actually they're not, but still. But to understand that side of her, I thought that was kind of fascinating, because it's just like, oh, you feel like you don't deserve anything because like your mom had to bang a producer to get you where you were. So you feel like some like it created like a condition in her head where she kind of just thinks like, subconsciously, I think she feels like she has to kind of like, she'll never be good enough, or she'll never do anything enough to escape, because she'll always feel like, oh, everything she's done was never of her own. It was like, oh, my mom or someone else was always responsible for any success I had. But then like her mom was like, yeah, I mean, the B-Lady was kind of basically like, well, when it's all said and done, like, we kind of grow up thinking our moms are something special just because we basically slide out of them. But it's like, no, they're just as much a dumbasses as, we kids. So it's a situation of like, your mom probably just wasn't good at expressing, how what was really going on. So you looked at it as her sleeping her way to kind of, she didn't realize what she was doing was going to basically create an issue in your head for you. What it came down to, it's like, your mom probably did that because that was her way. She loved you. She cared for. It's like she wanted the best for you. So even if it meant sleeping with a producer, she would do whatever it meant, that's whatever was necessary to make sure that you were okay. Trying to, I think in her own way, that was her own way of kind of being able to, show her love without, she's probably not one of those people who was able to kind of put it into words type of thing. But obviously for Rita, she can't really yell at her mom because her mom's been gone for a while now. But then the Bele's like, oh, how about the bees and stuff like that? Yeah, basically yell at them. She's like, it's cathartic and stuff like that. And she kind of yells at I love that whole thing of like, yeah, who got on the cover of Vogue? Okay, who got on the inside of Vogue? Who got on the back inside of Vogue? Whatever the case may be. But it's just kind of like she's like, I gave enough to you. But for her, it's like she has this feeling of, like I said, it's almost like it's never enough. Like almost like how much is enough? Like how much am I going to have to constantly owe to you? And it's like it's supposed to be cathartic, but you can tell it still didn't do what she thought it was going to do. It still didn't kind of free her of all that. So that was just kind of interesting getting that, side of things for Rita. There's a situation with Cliff I thought was interesting. Like obviously, like we see him flying out of the air. That was fascinating. For one, like the sign he crashes through, it's Steve. I was bugging. Like I meant to Google it, but I forgot what Steve's like name is. I know it's like vegetable mineral man. That's only a fraction of it, but it's like apparently there's an autobiography written about him and stuff like that. I'm like, I love that. And Cliff having to walk back and talking about the fact that he's going to kill Niles, but then that bird shits on him, and he's like, I'm going to kill that bird first, and then I'm going to kill Niles. Yeah, he better hope, because the moment I kill him, I'm going to throw him out of space, then I'm going to rip his head off, and then I'm going to shit down him. But it's like, but I can't shit. You know what, I'm going to get like a dog, I'm going to rip his head off, and then have the dog shit down him. Yeah, what was it, Marmaduke style or something like that. And then his body stops working again. Home dude rolls up and is like, yo, talking statue, this is crazy. He's like, dude, I'm a robot. It's like, yeah, man, you look more like a statue. And he's like, oh, you want to use my phone? Shout outs to my boy, like make a video shout out. And he was like, I'm not doing that. He does it not once, but twice to make a call. First, he does it trying to hit up Doom Manor. Everyone's got their own situation. We'll be getting to that soon enough. And I just love, once again, I guess it's just always going to be a background thing this season. Just see ghosts banging. It's like, I guess the Sex Patrol just couldn't get rid of all... I guess they could, not the Sex Patrol, that's the name of the episodes, the Sexmen. I guess they couldn't just get rid of all the ghosts because I guess it's just like, yeah, you can get rid of some of them, probably just not all of them. It's just probably just something that's going to constantly pop up. But I just love that that's still just a weird background thing. Couldn't get in contact with him. He calls up Clara and he kind of goes off on her a little bit. He's like, well, shit, I need to kind of get a do-over. Doesn't get a do-over, but he is able to start walking again, so... He does eventually make his way home to find Clara there, and it's like, wait, what? And it's like, she has the videotape. It's like, oh, Niles must have sent it to her. Because for him, it's like, because I guess with everything with him and Dorothy and, trying to, handle that whole situation, I guess he's like, at the very least, what I could do is, try to mediate the problem. Like, I created the issues between Clara and Cliff, and he wanted to do what he could to probably try and mediate that. So now it's like she knows the truth about everything that he did, Because that was more so for Cliff's own clarity, but I think also he wanted to eventually, like, show... Didn't he talk about he wanted to send it to Clara anyway? I think it was more so because I think eventually he was going to, but I guess he just never was able to himself. I think it was, it was on his own posterity of just like, I want video footage of like everything that you've ever done, to me and everything that you caused, But I'm curious to see what that means now. I mean, I wonder, is Clara going to end up hearing that voicemail he left? He's probably going to be like, oh yeah, like, will you hear that voicemail? Just ignore it. There's a voicemail in your message. Just ignore it. Just delete it. You don't even have to listen to it. Might be something like that, but I'm curious to see what this means for their relationship. Does this mean they can finally, start taking the steps forward? We'll kind of have to wait and see on that front. On the other side of things, obviously that box shows up, and I love that whole situation of like they all get a whiff of something. They're like, "What is that?" And that turns into this whole scant thing, which I love that. I'm like, okay, yep, here's the continued weirdness of Doom Patrol, because like Larry wants to go see his family, but then Miranda's like, I'll just give him space, and he's like, no, I'm gonna go, and she's like, he basically, it's like, oh, he's not listening to anybody, so it's like, oh, I know Jane told me not to ask any of her personalities for a favor, but could Flint help me? And she teleports him to the hospital. The Bureau of Normalcy's there, and I love that they pop away, and then like they get in, like they dress up like doctors, and they come in, and they just like, God, they'll never be able to see through our disguise. Bureau of Normalcy points guns at them again, and then they teleport away, and the dudes are like, oh, come on, not again. I love that. It's interesting because at first I was like, oh, are we going to spend time with Link? Because I was like, we've seen her pop in from time to time, but usually it's like, oh, I'm here, I'm going to teleport you, bam, I'm out. She's usually only around for like 5 seconds. So I was like, oh, this is going to be an opportunity to get to see her because she's wearing makeup and stuff like that. I was like, what that's all about? But Miranda kind of explains it later on, like, oh, Flint wasn't acting like herself. And I was like, oh, she's under whatever spell that is too. So I thought that was interesting. I wonder is the reason why she was infected because Miranda wasn't, but it didn't really showcase that any other personality was necessarily infected. They could have been and we just didn't know, but later on it did. I felt like those other person, like, because at least there's Silver Tongue and the electrical one, they both showed up. So I'm like, that makes me think like they weren't under control either. But I don't know, because it could be like when Flint came out, her around Larry just automatically got her infected, or they all were infected, whatever the case may be. What the biggest question I have, and I'm curious about, is why wasn't Miranda infected? Is it just like a natural ability of hers? Like, we still don't know what she's capable of. You know, I mean, hell, we still don't know what every personality is capable of. We have the ones we see kind of over and over again, like your Hammerheads. We know like her whole thing is superhuman strength. We know, obviously we know Karen. We know, I mean, we just got a side of what Baby Doll was capable of this season. So it's Dr. Harrison, so on and so forth. So we know a little bit here and there about some of them, but like a lot of them, we don't know what they're capable of. So I'm curious, like, obviously that's probably something we'll get answered later on. Or, I wonder, does it have something to do with being a primary that allowed that? Because that's what I was wondering. Is like, would Jane have been immune as well? Or is it just specifically Miranda because Miranda's a special case? I don't know. But I love she's constantly having to stop them from doing stupid things because it's like, Vic is telling Ronnie, like, oh, I love you. It's like, oh, because she's like, oh, we can't stay here because your grandpa, your dad, your friend isn't here. He's like, we don't need Niles. I've got this greatest technology right here. I'm going to handle the surgery myself. And Larry's like, oh, that's such a good idea. He's like, oh, you showed up great in time. You're dressed like a doctor. You're a doctor. Come on. And it's like they're ready to cut over Ronnie and everything. I was like, okay. And I love that it had to be Kip that shows up and like, you guys are idiots. The box literally said, do not open on every single corner, and you did it anyway. Stay here while I deal with it. You watch this video explaining the whole thing about the scans and just like the whole thing about them, like basically they take it, like they make you have bad ideas. They eventually come and like suck all the bad idea juice out of you, and they basically give it to their queen to drink, and it gives her superpowers and everything. I was like, that's so fascinating. I also love that Larry's sitting there eating popcorn, but he never moves the bandage, so he's just like putting it against his bandaged mouth, and it just drops into the bowl. I love that. Also, the whole thing about the painting and everything, because now it's blank. It's like, whoa, where did Mr. Nobody go? It's like, I forgot what Vic had said. He said something random and stupid where just kind of like, oh, like I wanted to see that guy or something like that. But they get sucked into the painting. Miranda follows them. They run into Beard Hunter. And I love him basically. It's like, oh, where's Mr. Nobody? He says his line where he was basically like, oh, he left because he got a job with some like animated voice acting and stuff. I was like, wait. I was like, because I don't know whether that was supposed to be like, I feel like there has to be like an inside joke. I mean, because if you're unaware, like DC wise, he voiced on Harley Quinn the animated series, he voices Joker. He also does Clayface too, doesn't? I could be mistaken, but I vaguely feel like I remember seeing in the credits he does more than one voice. I want to say it's Clayface too. I could be mistaken though. But that's why I was like, is that supposed to be like an inside joke DC wise, wink and nod to that or something like that? I was like, that's so interesting if that's where they were going. I mean, I would assume, because that's the only thing I can think of, not unless there's some other animated series he has voice act. That's just what popped in my mind. I was like, that's so interesting. I was like, that's so fascinating they did that. I mean, to be fair, this show makes inside jokes like that. But I just thought that was kind of fascinating. And Beer Hunter, I love him describing himself as like a semi pro Fortnite player. And so he's like, I know how to like hide. And it's like, oh, he's got the powder on him and everything. He's like, get behind me. If they find you, they'll kill you. But I was like, oh, he's so stupid. Oh, it's like, oh no, it looks like it was actually working until Lariat and the others got from behind him. And it's like, oh no, like, how about you take us to your queen, because we're here to kill her. And then, like, next thing we see is, like, Larry getting dragged away. He's like, come on, guys. I was like, oh, I love how stupid this is. And just Beard Hunter just stays there. I'm like, huh, that's interesting. It's actually kind of sad because you're the only one stuck there with all those scans. But I think with everything said and done in the episode, they're dealt with, but you're still kind of in the painting alone because you don't even have Mr. Nobody as company. But, it was really interesting when the queen basically kind of breaks everyone's thing down because she's like, oh, like you guys are, your biggest bad idea between Vic and Ronnie is them being together. It's like, oh, you two being together is your worst idea, bad idea. And she went to Larry and she was like, oh, like you feel like you can stay here. You think you can belong. You don't fit in here. So your bad idea is stay. She's like, oh, wow, you nailed me. Larry's like, oh, wow, you nailed me. She's like, no, I wasn't talking. I was talking to the creature inside of you. So it's like, now what's that mean? Like, I'm sure that's not going to make it easy for, like, that whole equilibrium between them to kind of work out. But then she got to Miranda, and it was fascinating. She was like, you seem immune. She's like, that's fascinating. But also, she's like, I can smell there's a really bad idea in there, but you're keeping it, like, tucked in. So it's like, I think maybe Miranda's whole thing is always being in control. Like maybe that's her thing. So it's like she has those impulses, she's feeling it, but she's able to kind of push it down. Maybe there's, I'm wondering if there's some stuff more to that because we'll get to it in a second. But obviously, I thought maybe we wouldn't be necessarily done with the queen because she exploded, but like her head wasn't chopped off. But I guess it's like, well, her head and her body exploded, goo flying everywhere. So I guess that's as good as dead. So that was interesting. Kind of really quickly jumping to the whole thing with the underground. I love that, like, because obviously Miranda's being celebrated, like, oh my God, you're so great. And Jane's like, yeah, it's not like I haven't saved you guys 100 times. It's like, well, you know what the difference between you and Miranda is? Like, she's not sulking like, which was like sulking like a bitch. I was like, Jesus, y'all are so mean. Like, I mean, you guys had your issues with Jane before, but for y'all to be like, they never really talked to her like that before. I mean, maybe they have. They got aggro at her sometimes, but never like that. But but then it's like, oh, like Scarlet Harlot's not here, and Jane goes to investigate, but her station is shut down. I'm like, okay, so what? Okay, so are we dealing with something? We're okay. So the question then becomes like, okay, what is Miranda up to? Is Miranda back because she's trying to get rid of all the other personalities because she's like, they're not necessary? I'm the only one that Kay needs. Is that something she automatically think? Is that what she's really thinking? Or is that a byproduct of her being in that well? Like, did going down there actually infect her with something that's up here trying to destroy Kay? Like, we know that what's in that well is connected to their dad, like obviously last season. So like, whatever that is, that darkness, did it infect her? And now it's trying to destroy the rest of the personalities because it's trying to kill Kay. Like, maybe that's what that is. I mean, that's what I'm wondering, There's also another slight thought in my head, like, could it be like another personality manifested itself? Like, what if what's down there is another personality that's either infected Miranda or is pretending to be Miranda? But the other side of things I was thinking about is, if it's not necessarily like she's trying to do it on purpose because she wants to be the only personality, is it in her own twisted mind, does she think that's what Kay wants? It's like, oh, Kay doesn't need them anymore, all she needs is, it's still kind of in line with what I was saying before, but I'm curious to understand like her motives behind why she would do that. Like, or could it be like she's actually taking the personalities and absorbing them to kind of make herself stronger? Like it seems like it all potentially, like it all leads to the point of either I think she wants to be the only personality. The question becomes like, why? What's the reasoning? Is it because she thinks it's for Kay? Is it for her own personal reasons? Is she being controlled and someone is pushing her to do that? That's kind of like the big question. Like I said, I could be completely wrong about like what the end goal is, but I'm curious to kind of dive into that out and see what what the underground looks like going forward, especially because like no one else is going to listen to her, I'm sure, because like, oh, it's just kind of like, no, Miranda's the best, get the hell out of here, Jane, no one cares about, blah blah blah, so because I'm sure everyone else is just gonna be like, oh, you're just jealous, you know. So it might be that situation. So we'll see. Then there's a situation with Vic and Ronnie, because Ronnie's like, yeah, I don't know if we should be together. Like, it's like, what the hell does that queen know? She's literally the queen of bad ideas. So I think if someone's going to weigh in on this and have some authority over that, I'm sure it would be her. But for Vic, it's like, despite everything, he likes her, and she's like, whoa, I thought you said you love me. He's like, oh, but that was before. I was like, oh, man. She's like, man, I'm just fucking with you. I was like, haha. But then I was like, is she just fucking with you, or is there some truth to that? But yeah, she ends up bouncing, and then we see that she kept a vial of that stuff, and you're like, oh, okay. So this makes it seem like this might be going down the route of what I kind of thought before. Not necessarily, exactly the way I thought it would be, but my thought was like the moment, Ronnie gets like whatever technology back or whatever, she's going to become the old version of herself. Like, the reason why she is the way she is now is because she was able to kind of leave that all behind, because I was like, oh, there's no getting that back. I'm dying. So the fact of the matter is, I got to make up for all the stuff I made. So it made her into a better person, trying to make up for all the stuff she did in the past. My thought process was always that I think that part of Ronnie is still there. If she ever gets power again, she's going to revert into that person again. And I think that's what's going to end up happening in this case. Is the fact is, she's going to take that stuff and she's going to get powers, and then she's going to go dark side Ronnie again. That's my thought process. That's where I thought this was going ahead, but I didn't expect it to be like, oh, powers through another means. I thought it would just be like, oh, somehow she got her implants, the technology that was inside of her back, and that's, but regardless, I'm interested to kind of see where that goes, especially like the complications. Like, is she going to avoid being around Vic because she'll probably be stronger and healthier, and she will try and want to hide that from him. So we might see aspects of that. But when it's all said and done, like, what will that mean for Vic and her relationship? Obviously, it kind of plays into the fact is of what the Queen said, it being a bad idea. The question did also play. It could turn into this thing, that it could be a thing of, you could look at it as, maybe that's the only reason why she's with Vic. Maybe she felt like, oh, this is something. The moment she found out, oh, he can help me, get better, then, maybe that's, incentive for her with this relationship. But then it's like, you hope it's not something that's, that's me being super pessimistic. Like, one thought, I want to be more optimistic and be like, no, you do care about him, you really do like him and stuff like that. But it's just, your darker intentions might end up kind of getting the better of you. We'll see. I mean, all this talk is about who Ronnie was then. I mean, we don't know, like, once she got all that technology and stuff, who knows if that wasn't just like an amplification of who she was. I mean, we don't know that Ronnie was like the best person, like even before like the technology, even before she started doing wet work. Like, we don't know that she was like the best person, before all that. So like I said, the technology could have already amplified. Like, maybe this version of Ronnie right now, sadly, might be the best version of her. Maybe she was a better person like before the technology and before she kind of got in that line of work. We like, despite everything, we don't know that much about Ronnie. Vic doesn't either. So like I said, keeping all that in mind, I'm just curious to kind of ultimately see where all that ends up taking us. I should also circle back. I love the fact is that like the Scant Queen was kind of like, oh yeah, like also like no matter how many times you summon her, she'll never love you like you do, because she's just a disembodied horse head. And he was like, because she doesn't even have a body, he's like, you don't have to have a body to have a heart. It's like, actually, you do. But I get the metaphor. You're talking from a romantic standpoint. Him even like sending her a message and everything. I was like, oh, that's super sweet. At the same time, there's a whole thing with Niles. I was surprised by that. I was like, oh, you're on Earth. It's like, oh, you're in the place where you met Dorothy's mom and everything. I was like, oh, okay. Because I thought it was like, are you going to go to a different planet or something? It's like, I guess, because I was like, are you going to drop her off there, leave her there? I mean, there's still the possibility, even though that place is isolated, there's still people who could still stumble across her. But I guess it was like he more so goes there because he's looking for guidance. I guess he's trying to talk to, because obviously like that's where her people are, so their spirits still live. So I guess he was hoping to kind of get in contact with her. But he doesn't talk to Dorothy's mom. He ends up talking to Candlemaker. And I thought that was so interesting, because basically Candlemaker is saying like, oh, you think I'm just kind of like a nightmare that came from Dorothy. He's like, I existed before then. Like, the fact of the matter is calling her mother, saying like, the fact of the matter, I guess it's almost like two sides of the same coin. Like, Dorothy is one side, he's kind of the other. But he makes it seem like, oh, I've existed before now. So either he was born with Dorothy, or he's like Manny, where Manny belonged to her mom beforehand. You know, because regardless whether or not he's been passed down from generation to generation amongst her people, or whether like her people, the spirits, their essence of who they were that made that, I don't know. The question, I mean, because even he asked, he's like, why did they make her? I mean, why did you curse my daughter with this? Like, giving her Candlemaker and everything. Was it because they believed that she was a cursed child? Or is it Candlemaker, is it kind of a thing where, like, Candlemaker kind of has to exist? Is it kind of like, in the grand scheme of things, it needs to exist for that purpose or whatever? I don't know. I'm curious to kind of see where that goes, and kind of understanding, you know, why that all is, you know. And then there's the ending where it's like Kip gets summoned by Niles, and basically, you know, Kip is going to take Dorothy, and because, you know, for Niles, he's like, I have no other options. I've run through the gambit. Like, there's nothing else I can do. I literally have to protect the world from her, and this is the only way I know how. And the question he's even asking Kip is like, where are you going to take her? He's like, yeah, that's not for you to know. Just let me know the place and time. So it's like, that's going to turn into a nasty situation. So it's going to be interesting to see where all of that ends up taking us as well. I'm very interested to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.